And we were brainstorming the title of this series, and we came up with this image of waiting rooms. I thought to myself, well, that's just perfect, because there's not much that I hate more in life than waiting rooms, and I mean literal waiting rooms. I mean, and I hate it. I hate the whole concept that we in our society have created rooms for no other purpose than for people to just come and sit and do nothing. It just goes against something that's in me. I hate the fact that, and I apologize if you're a doctor or work with one, but they make an appointment and they say, hey, come sit in my waiting room and come early because you need to be here early. And, you want to be a good patient and you show up early. And then you wait for 30 minutes past your appointment time. It drives me crazy. And I could go on, but we're not talking about literal waiting rooms, but we are talking about that whole idea. The circumstances that inevitably come about in your life and in my life, these situations where you're just stuck. And there isn't a thing in the world you can do about what's going on in your life. A situation you just can't do anything about. It's like a diagnosis from a doctor who says, well, we can treat it, but we can't cure it. It's the loss of a person, loss of a dream, maybe that is never coming back. That chance that you had is never coming back, or that person that you lost is never coming back, or maybe it's because of the economy or something happened and you've lost the dream of a career, maybe the career that you've been planning for your whole life, and now because of some things that have happened that aren't even in your control, that career that you wanted, it's not just going to be hard to get, it's going to be impossible for you to get. Maybe you have some people in your life, maybe a kid or someone you love, and they've made some really dumb choices. And again, you had nothing to do with it. It wasn't your fault. But because of their choices, now you're paying the price. You're paying the consequences, and your life is completely different because of what they've done. And it's not fair, but it's just the way it is. Or maybe it's just a moment that you find yourself living in, and it's that thing that we often call the new normal. Things were like they were, and you thought they were going along just great, and now things have changed, and it's the way it's going to be. It's never going to go back to the way it was, and you can't do anything about it. You can't fix it. It's just the way it is. And the question we've been asking in this series is, what do you do then? What do you do when there's nothing you can do? And if you haven't been here for the past few weeks, man, I hope you'll go back and catch up with what we've been talking about. We've been coming at this topic in so many different ways and in all kinds of different aspects and angles. In week 1, we said, when you come into a waiting room season in your life, that moment where you can't do anything, there's some temptations that come along with that. You're tempted to believe a few things. You're tempted to believe that, there's nothing good's going to come out of this, and I'm not going to be happy ever again because of the way things are going. And you're tempted to ask questions. You're asking, is God here? Does God care? Is he listening? Does he even see what's going on in my life? And we looked at the stories of some people that, well, you and I would all consider people who were loved by God, people in the Bible, and we looked at their stories, and we said, it's obvious that God loved these people, and yet they experienced some of the same hurts and some of the same problems that we do. Their prayers aren't getting answered. They went through enormous pain, enormous suffering, and their prayers weren't answered, but we said that there is a truth that we can hold on to, that God's silence does not equal God's absence. We can know that. Then last week, if that wasn't hard enough for you to hold on to, last week we talked about something that I think is, well, honestly, it doesn't make any sense. If you're not a Christ follower, I would never even ask you to even consider doing this, because even for those of us who do follow Jesus, this is almost impossible. Well, we said that when times like that come to your life, you can approach them in such a way as to almost invite them or to receive them with joy in your life, almost like a gift from God, if you can even believe that. Because there's a way to live through waiting room seasons in your life where you can have confidence of knowing two things, that they can come with a promise and a purpose in your life. And again, if you're still trying to decide what you believe about Jesus and Christianity, I know that probably sounds insane. Trust me, it sounds insane to most of us too. But this stuff we're learning is challenging, and we're just trying to figure it out. It's all kind of mysterious to us, including what we're talking about today. So today, as we get into the way I want to handle this talk today, I want to talk to you about something that, Well, first of all, I want to give you a new category of thinking. That's something that we've been doing in this series, is just giving us new ways to think about this and maybe open up some possibilities. And this one's pretty challenging too, and I'll start it this way. See, when you and I go through situations and things are not like they'd hoped for, one of the number one struggles that people have, I know I have this, I talk to people all the time, one of the number one struggles that we have is we often start to question, and we start to try and figure out, how do I reconcile that there's a good, loving, perfect God out there, and at the same time, I'm going through all of this stuff. I'm going through these hard, difficult, painful circumstances. We have trouble reconciling there being a loving personal God at the same time, because we think to ourselves, if God were loving, if God were paying attention, then my life wouldn't be this way. He'd do something. It's just the way we think. And I've thought that, you've thought that, probably you've had people ask that question of you all the time. Now, here's the challenging part of this whole idea. You know that the people that you and I would both consider to be heroes of the faith, men and women who saw Jesus, the men and women who passed down the historical accounts in the New Testament about Jesus and his life and his death and his resurrection, people we consider to be the closest ones to God, who there is no doubt God loved them and God was involved in their lives and God cared about them, these same people were no strangers to adversity. They didn't enjoy prosperous lives all the time. They didn't have pain-free, wrinkle-free lives. In fact, most of the stuff, if you were to study their lives and read their stories, most of the stuff that they went through is so far above what you and I go through. I mean, our stuff doesn't even compare to some of the things that these folks went through. And yet, even though we know they were close to God and they were loved by God, they saw no problem reconciling the fact that there was a loving God who cared about them, was involved in their lives, and the pain and the suffering that they tended to go through. They saw no conflict in that. In fact, we talked about it a little bit last week. We talked about the Apostle Paul, who had what we called this thorn in the flesh. You remember that? In fact, the Apostle Paul, if you don't know his story, I believe with the exception of Jesus himself, the Apostle Paul has had more influence in our world than practically anybody else in history. Paul wrote the majority of what you know as the New Testament in your Bible. Paul saw Jesus resurrected. He had that experience. He had this dramatic change. Paul went from being a terrorist who wanted to kill every Christian on the planet to actually giving his life, trying to make everybody become one. I mean, just this dramatic life change. And Paul suffered from what we know as some kind of disability. It was physical, it was painful, it was humiliating, debilitating, and it was permanent. We don't know exactly what it was, but he begged God to heal him. Take it away, God. And God repeatedly said no. In fact, God said to him, he says, I'm not going to heal you because my grace is enough for you. In fact, God told Paul, he said, in fact, I think I will get more glory out of you holding on to this, whatever it was, disability, thorn in the flesh, whatever it was. He said, I'll get more glory out of that if you hold on to it than I would if I were to heal you. Now, with all of that, this same guy, Paul, would later go on to say, even in the midst of something like that, in the midst of circumstances like that, where there's just nothing he could do about it, Paul would teach us later that there's a way for you to have contentment. Now, that's the word we're going to key in on today, contentment. What's contentment? Well, let's look at it. Contentment means this. Contentment means there is something on the inside of you that is at peace, while everything on the outside is just in turmoil. That'll be our working definition. That's what contentment, and that's something we all want. When everything around you is in turmoil, it's going crazy, and life is just in chaos, contentment is something on the inside of you being at peace, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So, if you want to follow along with us as we read this out of the Bible, I encourage you to do that. We're reading out of a book in your Bible called Philippians. Actually, it's not a book. It's actually a letter that this Apostle Paul wrote to a church in a town called Philippi. And this is one letter out of 4 different letters that Paul wrote that we often call the prison epistles. Now, I'll let you take a wild guess as to why we call them the prison epistles. Why do you think? Well, it's that simple. He was in prison when he wrote them. This is not hard. So anyway, he wrote these things while he was in prison. So the point of that is, Paul is writing these words in the midst of some heavy adversity. He's in a waiting room moment of his life. There's nothing he can do. I mean, think about it. What do you do when you're in prison? Not much. In fact, Paul looks around and says, well, all I can do is find a pen and a scrap of paper, and I'll just write me some letters. And that's what he does. So he sits down and he pens these letters. And the part that we're going to read is actually toward the end of this particular letter that he wrote, chapter 4, starting with verse 10. And here's what he says. And imagine, he's writing this from a prison cell. He says, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. Now, let me explain to you what Paul's talking about, give you some context so you know what he means. Paul had, sometime in the past, helped this church get started in Philippi. Now, later on, Paul does some other traveling around. He gets thrown into prison for no other reason than he is speaking up about Jesus. He defies the authorities. Again, they're after what he was after. They want to stamp out Christianity in the world, and so they go after Paul. They throw him in prison. Now, as you can imagine, it's the first century. News doesn't travel all that fast. It's not like he can just shoot an email back to Philippi. So it takes a long time for his friends back in Philippi to know that Paul's actually been thrown in prison. Once they hear about it, they're upset about it. They feel bad for their friend Paul, so they want to help. So they gather up what all we would know is some type of care package, and they send it to him while he's in prison. Now again, it takes a long time for stuff to travel in that day and age. So here's Paul sitting in prison for who knows how long, probably months, and he finally gets this care package in the mail from Philippi. And we don't know what was in the care package exactly. It may probably had all kinds of cool stuff, maybe Paul's favorite candy, something like that. I don't know. But it shows Paul, hey, these friends of mine, they know. They care about me. They haven't forgotten about me. And so Paul uses this idea as a launching point to talk about this idea of contentment. So he's using this care package he's just gotten to help illustrate a point about contentment to them. So look at the next verse. He says, thanks for the care package, but I'm not saying this because I'm in need. In other words, he's saying, hey, I'm happy that you didn't forget about me. I'm happy that I got friends out on the outside and you're thinking about me. Happy about the care package. Thanks a lot. The food was good, whatever. But Paul says, let me just be clear about what you did. I'm not happy about it because I needed it. I'm not happy about it because I was desperate and I was freaking out about what's happening to me right now. I'm not happy because I was just going crazy in this cell with anxiety and you finally sent me something. I'm not happy because I was just wasting away and I was, oh, pitiful me here in prison, and I was just waiting for you guys to reach out to me. That's not why I was happy. Next phrase, he says, for I have learned. And that just means, hey, this didn't come to me quickly. This is something that I had to develop. This wasn't intuitive. I didn't just get it automatically. It was a process. I had to develop it. I had to work at it. This took some time. I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Paul says, I have developed that calm. I've developed that peace, that contentment on the inside, but even though everything is chaotic on the outside. Whatever might be going on around me, I'm not debilitated by it. I'm not stressing about it. I'm not striving over it. I'm not running from it. I have peace. I have contentment. And it has nothing to do with what's happening to me right now. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I meet someone who says that or who possesses that, it does something for me. It makes me want to know more. I mean, doesn't that happen for you? I mean, when I meet somebody who has contentment and their life is in chaos, I immediately want to lean in and go, okay, can you tell me how to get that? In fact, is there a class you took for that? Because if there is, I'd like to sign up for it. I want to know, is there training for that? Because that's interesting. Because that's not common. That's not something you find every day. It makes me fascinated. I mean, I'm sure it does for you too. And you meet somebody who's just okay on the inside and things around them are not okay. Don't you just want to be around them more? Don't you just want to learn from them more? And I'm not talking about the person who's just apathetic, who says, oh, whatever. I mean, that's not the person. And I'm not talking about the overly religious person that makes you sick and just says, oh, I'm so thankful. No, not that. I'm talking about the person who is in the midst of some chaotic, horrible, suffering kind of circumstances, and for some reason they have the ability to just go, and they're okay. I mean, that's what I want to learn, don't you? Look at what he says next. He says, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. And that's a big statement. Don't miss what he's saying there. I mean, that's huge. He says, look, in my life, I've had more than I've needed. I've had plenty. I've been all right financially. I've been okay physically. But when I had all that, I did not get so wrapped up in what I had so much that I got addicted to it so that it stole my contentment when I didn't have it anymore. That's huge. In other words, he's saying, when life was good, I did not hitch my happiness and my emotions to all of the stuff, so when the stuff was gone, it didn't take my joy and my peace with it. Now, I don't have time to get into that. That's like a whole other message, but that's huge. There is a lot in that statement. He goes on. He says, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Now, this is the most fascinating, interesting part of this whole passage, and I want to teach you. That phrase that Paul uses right there when he says, I have learned the secret of being content, that's actually, that whole phrase is one single Greek word in the original language, and it's a word that Paul has never, ever used before. In fact, no other biblical writer ever uses this word, and I'll tell you why that's important. You know how sometimes when you're talking to somebody and you're really wanting to bring your point home, you just want to really make a point and just pound it, right? And you'll reach outside of your typical vocabulary, and you want to reach for a word that maybe you don't use very often. Maybe you heard it and you know it, but you just don't use it in common language. But you reach outside of your vocabulary and you bring in this word that you don't use much, and you just use it for impact. And people around you go, "Wow, you're using big words now." I mean, it's more than 3 syllables or whatever, and it provides a punch. That's exactly what Paul's doing. He's taking a word from their culture that he's never used before. In fact, this word that he uses is actually a word that's most closely associated with cultic mysticism. And it's true. This is a word that describes when someone gets initiated into a secret society or a cult. He says, I have learned the secret of being content. It's kind of like this. You know when you were in college and you got initiated into some kind of fraternity or some kind of sorority, and it was like a secret society kind of thing, and you had to go through a process. You know, there was a secret handshake, there was a secret code or a secret chant or motto or something that you say, or there was maybe a book that nobody else could see and with some rules that nobody else could follow or read about, and you were initiated into it, and you got to see it, or you got to understand what was behind it, and you were ushered into this secret society. That's exactly the image that Paul uses when he uses that phrase. He's saying, I've been allowed into this circle of knowledge. So quite literally, here's what Paul says. He says, I know a secret. That's kind of what he's saying. He says, I've been initiated into this cult or into this secret society known as contentment. There is something here that not everybody understands. There's something that I know that not everybody gets. It's this mystery. It's this secretive kind of thing. But I just want you to know, I have it. I understand it. And it's the secret of how you can live in contentment no matter what the circumstances are going on around your life. Now, don't that make you just want to lean in and go, come on, Paul, tell me, you know? That's what he wants. He wants you to lean in. He wants you to listen. I mean, he's like, he wants you to think, what's the secret, Paul? I want to be in the club. I want to know. Please don't leave me in suspense. Because think about this, and this is important to remember. Even before Paul is put into prison, Paul has been through circumstances that you and I can't even imagine. I mean, go back into the book of Acts sometime and read the story of Paul. Paul is flogged severely. He's stoned, left for dead. He gets chased out of town. He's under threat of his own life. He's got a price on his head. He gets shipwrecked, and then after that, he gets bitten by a snake. I mean, he's gone through the most amazing, painful, suffering kind of circumstances you can think of. And in the midst of all that, he says, hey, but I know a secret about how to stay content in the middle of all that. Don't you want to know what that is? I know I do. And then Paul finally reveals it. And he finally tells us in one verse. Now, if you've got your Bible open or you're following along with me, here's what I don't want you to do. Don't read ahead. In fact, cover it up. Don't even look at the next verse, because I don't even want you to read it yet, because there's a couple things I want you to understand. What we're about to read is one of the most popular verses in all the Bible. I also believe it's one of the most misapplied, misinterpreted verses in all of the Bible. And the reason is simple. It's really neat, it's really pithy, it's really memorable, and it just like begs to be quoted. It's one of those verses that you just want to put on a t-shirt, you know, and there's this verse, and Paul uses it to just sort of summarize as in one statement, how do you live in contentment when everything in your life is in chaos? How do I be okay when life is at its worst? Even when your life is threatened, how do you live in contentment? So here it is. Here's his summary statement, verse 13. He says, I can do all of this. All of what, Paul? Well, all of what we just talked about. All of the stuff that's going on in Paul's experiences. Being stoned, left for dead, thrown in prison, not knowing if you're going to make it out alive, losing your friends, people hating you, struggling with your health, enduring loneliness, all of that. I can do all of that stuff, he says. And I can still have contentment. How? Through Christ who gives me strength. Now, let me just say one thing. And I'll just say, what I'm about to say is probably going to sound a little critical and maybe a little bit harsh, but I have to say it because I want so badly for you to understand this. I don't want you to miss the power behind these words and the real meaning behind these words. You need to understand, when Paul wrote these words, he was not referring to this. Now, let me just say something about the image you're looking at. I have nothing against these kids. I have nothing against them putting this verse on their banner for their football team. That's not the point. I'm sure they're good kids. I'm sure they had the best of motives, and they're just trying to encourage their team, and they're trying to motivate their team. I get all that. That's all fine, okay? My point is this. What Paul meant when he wrote those words has nothing to do with an athlete winning a game. In fact, I often wonder sometimes if Paul's sitting up in heaven and he sees something like that, and he says to himself, okay, really? I mean, are you serious? I mean, I was in prison, and this is not about winning something. Paul says, dude, this is about surviving something. And it's not about a game. It's not a game, man. This is real. This is life. It's not about football. And listen, again, I don't say that to be critical or snarky or any of that. I'm saying this to you because it matters. Because here's the thing, and this is serious. If you take this verse and you rip it out of its context, you lose everything about the verse. You lose the whole deal. You lose the meaning. I mean, you miss something so important. Think about it. You're missing the secret of contentment. You miss being initiated into a secret life of learning how to be fine on the inside when the rest of your life goes to hell. That's huge. I can do all of these things. I can survive any circumstance. I can maintain my peace and my composure. I can be okay even though everything else is not. And I can do it not because I'm strong, not because I'm special. I can do it because Christ gives me strength. So let me summarize Paul's words for you, because what he says in that verse I think can be put into basically three statements, and I want you to learn these. I want you to take them with you this week. Paul is saying these three things. He's saying, I can't, but he can, and he can through me. I can't, he can, and he can through me. I can't. That's basically stating reality, right? It's saying what's true about me, what's true about my situation. I cannot remain content when everything around me goes wrong. I can't do it. Why? Because I'm weak. So are you. I have limitations. I fret. I worry, don't you? I want to give up. I want to quit. I can't do it. I can't stay content. But he can. Now that's huge because that's a statement of faith. That's a statement of trust and confidence in Jesus. And listen, this doesn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, you don't just say he can because you just believe it. It's like blind faith. How do I know that Jesus can remain content in any and every circumstances? Well, I know it because he's done it before. I mean, if Jesus can endure and willingly go to experience a death on a cross for no other reason than his pure determination to love imperfect, messed up people like you and like me, to go through a circumstance like that, if Jesus can do that, then I can have full confidence that he can do the same thing in my situation. He can, because he's done it. And he can through me. That's a statement of surrender. It's this willingness to allow his can to work in the midst of my can't. In other words, when I bring those two things together, when I take my inability and my weakness and I meet his strength and his ability, it's more than enough to endure whatever it is that I'm going through. It's enough to hold me together. It's enough to make me content no matter what is happening to me. So when you're single and you've waited so long, and you want more than anything to have someone to just come into your life and share your life with you, and time keeps ticking by more and more every day, and it just feels like this is never going to happen, I'm never going to meet the right person, and it just goes on and on and on. You can say, I can't be content in this, but I know he can, so he can through me. When all you want is to be a parent, and you've tried and you've tried and you've tried, and for whatever reason, it's just not happening for you, and the doors seem to get closed every time you try to go through them, and the options just seem to get smaller and smaller and smaller for you, you can say, I can't be content in this. I can't. But he can. So he can through me. When the doctor says we can treat that, but we can't cure that, you can say, I can't be content, but he can. And he can through me. When your marriage seems like it's just a constant, daily struggle for you. When she's not the woman you thought she was going to be, and when he's not the dream that you had for a husband, and when you've tried all the therapy and you've tried all the counseling, and you start to think, you know what, this is probably the way it's going to be. I'm going to be struggling in my marriage from now on. It's just not going to change. You can say, I can't be content, but he can. So he can through me. When the career you've worked for since college is just constantly out of your reach, when the economy puts a strain on your options and your finances, when something happens in this world that you had no control over and you didn't anticipate it, and the bills pile up and you feel like I'm never going to work my way out of this mountain, you can say, I can't. But he can, and he can through me. Listen, if you're not a follower of Jesus, I know this kind of sounds mystical, and I know it sounds a little bit weird to you. And listen, even if you are a Christ follower, there's a mystery to this. That's the point. This is a mystery that creates a reality. And that's why Paul describes it the way he does, a secret society, and that you have to enter into it. And for in some way, somehow, in this mysterious way, the strength of Christ to endure, to be content under the worst circumstances is somehow available to us. And if we'll allow him to, he will give us his strength. And we can have what Paul says is a peace that passes understanding. I usually like to say it this way. There's a peace that just don't make any sense, especially not to people on the outside looking in. And you can have that peace. It doesn't even have to make sense. You won't even understand it. But it's available to you. I can't, but he can. He can through me. And that's my challenge to you this week. I want you to begin to explore the mystery of Christ's strength living in you, to help you learn that secret of how to be content. I want that for each and every one of us. So here's what we've done. On the back of your connection card today, I just put a simple next step that you can take. And it's simply this. Every day this week, I want you to be reminded of those three statements. This mystery. 'Cause see, I know in a church our size, no doubt, Some of you are going through some situations and you're just struggling to stay sane, much less content. And you need this. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. I want to challenge you to write down those three things. I can't, he can through me. On a piece of paper, on something. And I want you to put it somewhere in your life that you're going to see it every day. Maybe your mirror in the bathroom, maybe in your car, maybe at your desk in your office. Somewhere that you'll be forced to see it every day, because I want you to be reminded of that truth every single day this week. And I want you to commit. I will look at that and I will remember every time I see it that I can't, but he can, and he can through me. And I want to encourage you to check that box on your connection card to let us know. And here's why we ask you to do that. I know some of you think that, we take up these cards and we don't even look at them, but that's just not true. We do. We look at every single one. And more importantly than that, we pray for you. We pray for everybody who takes a step, that God will be involved in that he would provide you the strength to do whatever it is you've committed to do. Maybe that's too much for you, and you're still saying, this is still all kind of mysterious and weird to me. I get it. We get it. Maybe your next step is just saying, hey, I'm interested. It sounds interesting, and I want to know more. Maybe you can just say, hey, I'll come back. I'll be a part of the rest of this series. And because we know if it's your first time, it's weird for people to ask you to do something like that. We just want to know you. We want to know that you came. We want to pray for you, and that's it. Now, before we close, and you're considering taking those steps, I want to just say one last thing before we close. And I hope this is an encouragement to you. I really do. I want you to think about that thing in your life that you would say right now causes you the most discontentment. My guess is you don't have to think very hard. Most of us have something in our past. Most of us have a situation, maybe a person in our lives, and it just constantly causes us that feeling of discontentment, of not having peace on the inside when things on the outside are not going well. I want you to think about what that is. Most of you don't even have to think very hard. Here's what I want you to know and what I want you to remember about that situation, about that person, and about that circumstance, whatever that is. The thing that tends to cause you the most discontentment is the very place where God can do the most in your life. We talked about this a little bit last week. There is more potential for you to grow and change and learn and maybe even eventually experience some measure of victory in that place of discontentment than anywhere else in your life. It was true for Paul. I mean, think about it. He was thrown in prison. There was nothing he could do. So what did he do? He said, I'll write some letters. And I want you to think about something. What are the odds that letters written in a prison on scraps of paper found anywhere in a prison in the first century what are the odds that they would even reach their destination once he sent them out? Much less be copied and preserved and passed down for 2,000 years and become the most documented, influential writings in all of human history. I mean, what are the odds? I mean, the fact that you are here today learning from his words tells us what was hanging in the balance of Paul's willingness to be faithful and to hold on to the secret of contentment. You hung in the balance. I hung in the balance. We all did. That was what was at stake. The same thing's true of my life. I mean, no other time when I get to know someone and I'm talking to them, there is no other moment than when I tell them about my greatest discontentment, my greatest disappointment, my greatest fear, my greatest suffering. That is the moment that provides the most encouragement, the most God gets more glory out of that part of my life than any other thing that I share with people. I can't, but he can, and he can through me. That moment of greatest struggle, that moment of greatest discontentment is the place where you are able to say that, and God gets all the glory. The same thing is true for you. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of you learning this secret. You have no idea what God could be able to do. The secret of contentment, if you just learn it, that mystery of Christ, his strength living in me. So my prayer is today that you'll live with it. I can't be content. But he can, because I know he's done it. And he can through me. Let's bow and pray. God, I pray that those three things would just ring in our ears and in our hearts and in our minds all week this week, that when life is chaotic around us, we'll be reminded of what Paul said was the secret of contentment, that I can't do it, but you can because you've done it. So we surrender. God, you can do it through us. You can teach us the secret of living with that peace that passes all understanding. God, I pray for people who are struggling today, who are in those waiting room seasons, that God, you would just give them that strength, that mystery, that they would experience it today. In Jesus' name, amen.